Hi, my name's Todd. 我的中文名字叫康宏熙. I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey with Mandarin, to explain a little bit to you about my background in the Mandarin language and where my knowledge and experience is coming from. I started studying Mandarin in my 20s. That was in Dallas, Texas, when I met a family who was running a small Chinese restaurant, and they came from Taiwan. That was my entry into learning Mandarin. It was a curiosity thing because I'd already learned French, Spanish, I'd studied German, Russian, American Sign Language growing up with friends in high school. And so it was another challenge. I had never delved into Eastern languages before, and so I thought this would be interesting. And there were people there who, it was their native language. They couldn't speak English, so I thought this is a great challenge. So had to leave, moved to California for a job, and they gave me a phone number. They said, if you ever want to go to Taiwan and learn Mandarin, then call this number and they'll set up a homestay for you. So I took it with me, put it in my pocket for a few years, and ended up in San Francisco working as a concierge at what was once called the Ramada Renaissance Hotel in downtown San Francisco. At that point, I just started to feel like, I continued to learn Mandarin. Being in San Francisco, there was opportunity for learning Mandarin. A lot of, there was Chinatown. We all know about San Francisco's Chinatown. Cantonese, but, at that point, I didn't really know the difference. I mean, it's like Chinese is Chinese, and, who knows? So I just made the decision to quit my job, fly to Taiwan. I called the people at that, it was a foundation, it was a cultural foundation. They invited me over, they set me up with a place to stay, flew to Taiwan, spent a year and a half there, and while I was there, I was taking Mandarin. And the Mandarin that I was learning in Taiwan was very different from the Mandarin that I speak today. It's been on quite an interesting journey that I've gone through, and I'm going to try and explain that to you a little bit because it's important for understanding how we should choose the language that we're learning, the dialect that we're speaking, essentially. So in Taiwan, I was learning basically Taiwan Mandarin, and it was in an official school. And out in the streets, you're hearing a lot of Taiwanese, you're hearing a lot of different styles of Mandarin. You have Taiwanese Mandarin, you have proper Mandarin from the people who came over from the mainland in the 1940s. You have a lot of different mixtures of backgrounds of language, but everybody speaks Mandarin for the most part in the north as the common language. A few examples. When I first learned how to say passport, my first iteration was fu zao, which what I thought was passport because that's what I learned it as. And later somebody in Taiwan corrected me. They said, no, that's a very strong Taiwanese Southern Minnan Taiwan Hua way to say hu zao. So I changed from fu zao to hu zao. And then eventually, once I get to Beijing, years later, I learned another way to say it, which is actually the proper way, and that's hu zhao. So that's one way to understand the differences about how the language can be spoken, the different accents, if you will. So then I went to Hong Kong. I was offered a job in Hong Kong in a hotel as a concierge, and went to Hong Kong, spent about a year and a half in Hong Kong, and I got a job offer in Hangzhou. So then I moved to Hangzhou, and in Hangzhou, I worked in a hotel there, the Hangzhou Hotel. It was a great experience, a wonderful town, neat city. I guess it's grown to this huge place now. But I really enjoyed my time in Hangzhou. No real language experiences there except learning more things. I learned an expression there. One of the drivers at the hotel that I was working at was playing a joke on me, and he said, oh, everybody's always complimenting on you on your Chinese, and so he taught me something to say when people said that, and it's 知识渊博. He just said, when somebody says that to you, that you speak good Mandarin, just say 知识渊博. And I started saying it, and I couldn't really understand why people were reacting so strangely. And so I asked somebody else and they said, oh, no, that means, oh, yeah, I know everything. So it's a little bit embarrassing. I stopped saying that. From Hangzhou, then I was offered a job at the Shanghai Hilton to work as the head concierge there. And so I moved from Hangzhou to Shanghai for that opportunity. Shanghai is a whole different world for Mandarin because it's very strongly influenced by the Shanghainese accent. And but there are people there who speak very good, proper Mandarin. It just depends on the individual. And that's the hard part for a learner, to be able to differentiate between what is proper and what is not proper. Zhi, chi, shi, zh, ch, sh doesn't exist for the most part in the southern Mandarin because they don't pronounce that sh, and you don't hear the sound. Too much is not good. Beijing is definitely not a dialect that you want to learn because the Beijing dialect is an overdoing of the R sounds. It needs to be somewhere in the middle. So, zhi, chi, shi versus zhi, chi, shi, or zi, ci, si. We need to find a good middle ground in our pronunciation style. After spending a year or so in Shanghai, I was offered a job in Beijing with United Airlines, and so I moved to Beijing. That put me in a whole different environment. And an interesting story about another thing that I learned in Taiwan was I want soda pop, and I did a short on this one. I want soda pop. 我要汽水. So when I was in Beijing, which was in 1985, the first time I went there, I wanted to buy some pop on the street, and there were some people out selling soda, and so I went up to the lady and I said, 我要汽水. Because I just came from Taiwan. I just rode a 36-hour train from Shenzhen to Beijing. And she looked at me, she looked at her colleague next to her, and she said, 她说什么? And her colleague looked at her and said, 她说要汽水. Okay, that's like way over on the R's, but that's just sort of explaining that 汽水 and 汽水. So how do we find the middle ground there? 汽水. We don't need to say 汽水. That's a very strong Beijing sort of a style Mandarin. But 汽水 is a good proper Mandarin. 汽水. See, you're not getting those CH sounds or the SH sounds in the southern Mandarin. So then spent a few years in Beijing, and that was a good opportunity for me to improve my Mandarin, getting more of a northern dialect, which is the standard style. And then also I had the opportunity to work in radio and television while I was in Beijing. And so working with them, they worked with me to improve my pronunciation for TV and radio. So the people I was working with directly were working with me to help me to speak proper Mandarin so that I would sound more presentable. I mean, we, as a foreigner, we want to be able to speak proper Mandarin. We don't want to sound like we're coming from some place that doesn't speak proper Mandarin, and that is something that people will judge us by, and so we want to speak properly. If we can play around with different accents, that makes it fun. But when it's important to speak proper Mandarin, we want to speak proper Mandarin. That is official. That is, people will respect that. They will recognize it. Even if they don't speak it themselves, they still know the difference. After Beijing, then I went to Shenzhen. Worked in Shenzhen with Corning Glass. I got a job offer from them while I was in Beijing. Cantonese, because that was early on in Shenzhen, and so I had already learned Cantonese from going back and forth to Canton to Hong Kong for years. Could get along well with Cantonese. When I was living in Shenzhen, I learned more Cantonese. Back to Beijing for a year, and then I went to Hohhot, Inner Mongolia, to attend university, get a bachelor's degree in Mongolian language and literature. That was a really wonderful experience for learning more about the Chinese language, the Chinese culture, and all the aspects of the intertwining relations and history of the Han and the many 55 ethnic minorities that live in China. It gave me a lot more insight. I had a really good friend from he's Tibetan, and we met in Beijing. He was actually the catalyst that got me to go to this university in Inner Mongolia. Originally, he wanted me to go to Tibet and learn Tibetan. I didn't want to study Mandarin. I felt like I already speak Mandarin. I just wanted to learn another language because I love languages. And so Mongolian was the language that he sort of guided me towards. since I didn't really want to go to Tibet. I just felt like I didn't want to stand out like a sore thumb in Tibet, because at that point Americans it wasn't a place that we could go to easily. And he said that his dad was in government. He said his dad would take care of everything for me, but I just didn't want to. It was like so far away. But then everybody in Beijing said, "You're going to Inner Mongolia, it's so far, it's so far." It's like an 11-hour train ride back then, and that's not very far. Actually, when I moved from Beijing to Inner Mongolia to Hohat, it was kind of fun because I had to move my stuff, and so I got a truck. A guy, moved me out there, and that was a whole nother experience, driving through all of the little villages. We got stopped and held up, and they wanted my stuff, and it was a trip. But the driver got us through it, and I got all of my things to Inner Mongolia. After that, I graduated from Inner Mongolia. I went back to the States and spent a couple years. Then I got hired for a position in Harbin. And so that moved me to Harbin, where I really got into an environment where proper Mandarin is spoken by a lot of people. And that is actually the place where many of the announcers on Chinese TV and radio come from, because Harbin is seen as the most proper standard Mandarin of all of China, and that's where its model comes from. So having lived in Harbin for 5 years and doing television while I was there too, talk shows, things like that, I'm putting a few of those things up on my YouTube channel so that you can see those. They're fun. It's great experiences. Also spending time in Inner Mongolia, I was given the opportunity to go and live with Mongolian herders during the summer, when I was in summer and didn't have classes. And then later on, Inner Mongolia TV did a mini-series and took me around to different areas of the grasslands of Inner Mongolia to visit different families, and it was really interesting, and I'll put a few of those things up too. So later on, after I came back to the States, and then I went back to Taiwan again for another one-year job to manage a company while looking for a general manager to take over. While I was there, I started learning Buddhism. And I was learning Buddhism through a Taiwanese monk who had a small temple. It was a really neat spot up on a mountain on Yangmingshan, just outside of Taipei. So I started learning Buddhism, and that was the thing that really jettisoned me into getting into more philosophical and deeper thought and deeper culture of the Chinese culture, because I was learning it all in Mandarin. And then when I came back to the States afterwards, I started reading more in all of these areas. And so that reading is something that has really taken me to a whole new level in my understanding of the Chinese culture and the Chinese language. And so that's basically my experience with the Chinese language and my journey with Mandarin. I just wanted to share it with you, and I hope you found it enjoyable and interesting, and I wish you all the best. And while you're at it, check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/mastermandarin, and check out some of the comprehensible input that I'm putting up there for you to help you improve your Mandarin and to take it to a whole nother level through my own experience and the things that I've learned. And I'm putting things out there that are culturally important or interesting and linguistically at the same time. So, 加油!